So it's 11 o'clock. I want to welcome you all to what you need to know about the newly available business loans. I want to thank our friends over at Tannenbaum, Helpern, Syracuse, and Hershut for their generosity in providing us information. Today we have three of their attorneys, Jason, Michael, and Alexa. Will you guys wave your hands so people know who you are? There you are. So I invite you to start the program. And again, please stay on mute. If you have a question, put your questions into the group chat. We now have 53 people on the call. So why don't we get started? Jason, you're muted.
You just muted me again, so I had to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We have a presentation that Mark is sharing on the screen, and unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties this morning with our Citrix. So we've updated the presentation, but we're not able to share it with you. So you may hear some things during our presentation that are a little different from what's on the slides. But as soon as we can after the program, we will share the updated deck with you. And if you have any questions during the presentation, just use the chat function. We already received, prior to this presentation, about 7 or 8 questions, and we'll answer those at the end. So by now, I'm sure you all know about the CARES Act. It was enacted on March 6th, and it helps businesses that were injured by the corona epidemic, and makes available these economic injury disaster loans and these paycheck protection loans, which we'll talk about later. These loans are funded by the SBA. Now, the EIDL loans are available directly on the SBA's website, so you can't go through your bank to get those. In terms of eligibility, any small business and most nonprofit organizations, except those excluded types of businesses that we'll discuss, in all 50 states can apply for the EIDL. These types of businesses include manufacturers, wholesalers, restaurants, hotels, recreational facilities, owners of rental property, sports vendors, retailers, souvenir shops, travel agencies, and charter boats. The eligibility for these EIDLs are based on the size of the business. They must be small, and the type of business and its financial resources. The amount available under these loans is capped out at $2 million. The proceeds from these loans may be used to pay fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that cannot be paid because of the disaster's impact. The interest rate on these loans is 3.75% for businesses and 2.75% for nonprofits. The terms are determined on a case-by-case basis based on each borrower's ability to repay, and the loan term can be up to 30 years. Typically, the SBA will consider the credit score of the company that applies for the loan, but due to the unusual circumstances with the coronavirus pandemic, a company's credit will no longer be a dispositive factor in the SBA's process. The SBA will make a determination of whether the business can repay the EIDL. So EIDL loans that are over $25,000 require collateral. But if none is available, again, that's not going to be dispositive, and the SBA will still grant the loan. But if there is collateral available, they'd want to take that. And that includes real estate, accounts receivable, any assets that are available. There's no personal guarantees that are required for EIDL loans above $200,000. Excuse me, below $200,000. Bear with me a second. So under the EIDL program, There's also an emergency advance feature. So these came online last Friday on the SBA's website. So you can apply for those online. And within 3 days, the SBA has promised to give $10,000 in emergency relief. So even if you're not approved for the loan, or you decide not to take the money, you're still gonna get that $10,000, and that doesn't have to be paid back at any time. So it's free money. So if you want to have $10,000 in free money, you can apply for these EIDL loans. So moving on to the Paycheck Protection Program loans, which is really what most businesses are focused on. This provides tax relief to affected businesses and provides for additional unemployment benefits for individuals who are affected by the pandemic. Last night, the Treasury Department released some additional guidance on the PPP loans. So some of the things that you've heard over the past week since the law was enacted have changed slightly, and we'll go through those. So the PPP loans are available to businesses that employ up to 500 employees, although there are some exceptions, but essentially I would use 500 employees as your guide. They are administered by SBA lenders, which are banks. Most major banks are SBA lenders like Citibank and Chase and KeyBank. So I would talk to whoever you have a banking relationship with, and they can help you fill out the application. A lot of these applications are going to be online. So talk to your banker and they can direct you to where on their website these are available. So our understanding is that the bank's going to start taking applications on April 3rd for small businesses and sole proprietorships. And they'll be taking applications on April 10th for independent contractors and self-employed individuals. So unlike other SBA loans, the Paycheck Protection loans are also being made available to nonprofit organizations, veterans organizations, and tribal businesses. So when you apply for the loan, you're going to have to make a good faith certification that the funds will be used to retain workers, maintain payroll, and pay for rent and similar expenses. So the loans should be paid, the loans should be used to, for payroll for employees who make less than $100,000 per year, for rent, for mortgage interest payments, for healthcare benefits, and for utilities. The average loan amount that could be applied for is tied to your average monthly payroll costs. And that is 2.5 times the monthly payroll cost for your average monthly payroll cost in 2019. And that's a change from what the original law was. So in the original law, it was a trailing 12 months. But now the Treasury Department is saying that it's 2019 average monthly payroll.
Hey, Jason, I might be a little lost on these slides here. Which slide should I be on?
PPP loans relief provided.
Okay.
I think it's page 12.
All right. Tell me when to switch.
Okay. I mean, these slides are detailed, so I'm not going through every single item on there, but I think it's good for everybody to have a copy of this. So, and I assume, Mark, you'll distribute this after the call?
Yeah, when you send me the real one, I'll post a recording of this video for people as well as whatever information you send me.
Okay, sounds good. So the documentation that the banks are going to require, are going to be W-2s, payroll tax returns, 1099s, income tax returns. So I would start getting that information together so that you're ready to file on April 3rd or April 10th. The maximum loan amount under the PPP is $10 million. Mark, we're going to switch slides. So the greatest feature of these PPP loans is that a portion of the loan will be forgiven if you make certain if you pay certain expenses. So the loan forgiveness amount is equal to the amount spent by the borrower during an 8-week period after the origination date of the loan. And the spend is on payroll costs, interest payment on mortgages existing prior to February 15, 2020, payment of rent on any lease in force prior to February 15th, and payment on any utility for which service began before February 15th. Now, the new regulations that came out yesterday require that 75% of the loan must be spent on payroll. So that's a new regulation that came out yesterday. Also, the Treasury Department has told us that you should keep your records because you will have to submit them in order to get the forgiveness. Now, what happens if you lay workers off or decrease their salaries? So the amount of calculated loan forgiveness will be reduced if there's a reduction in the number of employees or a reduction of greater than 25% in wages paid to employees during that 8-week covered period after the loan is originated, compared to other periods either in 2019 or 2020. However, if no later than June 30th, a borrower rehires employees that were terminated between February 15th and April 26th, and reverses reductions in salary and wages between February 15th and April 26th, these terminations and reductions will not be factored in to determining a reduction in the forgiveness amount.
I'm sorry, I have one quick question.
Sure.
So any employee that makes over $100,000, how does that get factored in?
So if an employee makes, let's say, $200,000, you only count the first 100. So you count that first 100 when you're determining the amount of the loan and when you're determining the amount that will be forgiven.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Does that amount, is that only on base salary or base plus bonus and commissions?
It's on base plus commissions.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
And health, I believe, as well.
Hi, I have a question
Total
regarding
compensation.
professional services firms.
Mhm.
So with the payroll forgiveness, so we deploy a lot of resources, think engineering firms, accounting firms, staffing firms. So we deploy resources, and while we may have full intentions of retaining our payroll, our clients often dictate what the result is. Do you have any professional opinion on how we should be looking at these types of loans and approaching these types of loans?
I think it's whatever your actual spend has been in the past compared to what you're going to spend over the next 8 weeks.
So should we be looking at it as our internal population versus our external population? Or should we be looking at it as one big population?
I would look at it as one big population.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding
Sure.
the wages. If I have a lot of hourly employees, and prior to this disaster, we had a lot of overtime. If last year I had a significant amount more overtime than I do now, even if I haven't reduced anybody's hourly rate, is that going to count against me?
It will count against you.
So is this based on total spend and head
based on-
count?
It's based on total spend. So you compare the amount that you spent during this 8-week period back to those periods in 2019, 2020. So if you have extra money that's spent, for commissions or overtime, it's still going to get factored in, unfortunately. At least that's the guidance right now. Of course, the SBA could issue additional guidance over the next week or so. So that may change.
So head count does not count?
Head count does count. So it's a comparison of the head count and a comparison of the wages.
And do 1099 consultants count in spend?
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Sure.
I noticed I have a few spreadsheets from banks. A couple of banks have put things out already, and it looks like they deduct from both sides, last year's and this year's. It looks like they deduct withholding taxes, which didn't make any sense to me. I mean, if I pay an employee $100 it holds $30 in federal and state. Why should they reduce? Is that the case, or?
That is the case. So the way
So
the
far,
law
it
was
says
set up,
state gets, so far
the
it says
state
state
and
gets put
local
back.
taxes are included. I'm sorry. go ahead.
Income doesn't get included. That's what it says so far, but all of this is speculation until they say exactly what average monthly payroll is.
So
Well-
if we were laying off people because of the trade war, that will work against us at this point, is what you're saying?
Well, when did you lay them off?
Last year and early this year.
That will hurt you in terms of how much money that you can borrow under this loan. But if the periods are comparable, it shouldn't help you in terms of your loan forgiveness, because you already had a lower bar. If you look at it from a numerator and denominator standpoint, your denominator already started lower, so it shouldn't really affect you as much. But you're not going to be able to borrow as much.
So a quick question. So if I have a 1099 consultant, I count them in establishing my salary for the 2.5 multiplier,
Yes,
and I count them as an employee.
you count him as a payroll cost.
As a payroll cost, do I count them as one of my employees?
For what purpose?
With
Headcount.
calculating the number of employees for the average number of employees.
You know what? I don't know the answer to that. Mike, do you know the answer to that?
I think you do, because the actual payroll cost, the employees, is defined pretty broadly in the regulation. So I think that would include independent contractors, 1099s, et cetera. I think one thing to keep in mind here is that the statute was not written as clearly, I think, as we'd all like. Certainly not the lawyers, or certainly you business owners as well. The banks, I think, themselves are trying to get around this. The SBA is supposed to issue more regulations probably this week or early next week. We'll probably know more at this time. I think one of the, I was looking through the chats. I think Danny Mizrahi really kind of hit the nail on the head with respect to kind of how we should focus on kind of the next steps. Is one is, if you have a relationship with a bank already that's an SBA lender, talk to them. I've heard anecdotally from others that they've reached out to banks with whom they did not have a relationship, and the bankers had told them, look, if you're not a client of ours, we'll put you on our waiting list. We have too many of our own clients to work with on this. Thousands, tens of thousands of people are going to be doing exactly what everybody else is doing here and trying to do these loans. I think it would be helpful to get get your banker, hopefully get their attention, get the paperwork done. I think, as Jason has mentioned, there is an application form that was put online. I'm showing it up here. You really can't see it all that well. It's basically one page worth of information, along with actually 2 pages of information, along with some supporting descriptions of what you need to do. I think I'd also suggest or caution that, given just as a number of people that you're going to have trying to deal with these loans, the banks, I think, are going to get overwhelmed. There's going to be a ton of people putting in their applications on April 3rd and shortly afterwards. I don't expect the money to be flowing freely very quickly. I mean, maybe I'm kind of a pessimist at heart. I'm a bankruptcy lawyer, so that's kind of how I tend to view things. Hopefully, it's not going to be that difficult. I think what we should do, when you put in the application form that was put out online, ask for average monthly payroll. Now, I would put in your employees, including those that make over $100,000, but only the first $100,000 of them. Your 1099s, even your partners, even though the statute doesn't really talk much about partners. And that will be what you could put down as your average monthly payroll. They ask you to multiply that by 2.5 times. You put that amount there, and that's what you are going to be asking for. The bank may come back and say, okay, I want more information. That's, I'd kind of expect them to do that. But again, given the thousands upon thousands of applications are going to be coming in, I think people are going to be deluged. And the bankers are not going to necessarily know the answers to every single question about the intricacies of this. Jason, me, Alexa can certainly help and tell you what the regulations say, et cetera. Sometimes there's a disconnect, though, between what the regulations may say or what the right interpretation is and what your banker is going to tell you. And certainly your lawyer, your accountant can help you with respect to your banker's telling you something that just makes no sense. Having your lawyer or the banker on the line or as a sounding board could be helpful. But the problem is that this is the way it's been set up. The EIDL is even worse because you have to apply online directly through the SBA. I've heard anecdotally there that the SBA is not getting back to anybody. You can't even get much of a confirmation that the application's even been sent, or maybe you get an email and you hear nothing back. The SBA, they're inundated as well, and everybody's working from home. So I don't want to throw a bunch of cold water on this. These are helpful programs, but I think we have to sort of kind of do what we can now, get the documentation that's being asked for in the application, ask for as much as you can. And we can talk about what you can rightfully put in versus what just makes no sense for what you're putting in for your payroll, for what you're asking for, and stay on top of your banker. Hopefully somebody you have a pretty good relationship with, and make sure that they're focused on it.
Michael, if I could just jump in, this is Danny Mizrahi. I was the one that wrote that kind of really long one. What's up, Mike? How are you? I'm adding the actual application to the chat right now. So what we did internally, just from an experience share perspective, is we basically ran every type of number so that we could try to get first in line in terms of, getting the application in. All of those numbers that the M&T asked us to get ready for them, we did. But then we also, because average monthly payroll spend has not been defined yet, we basically put, what is it with adding the health costs and up to 100K max per person. Then we did, what is it taking away income tax, but re-adding state tax, because that wasn't clear on the application at all either, whether or not taxes are going to be in or out. It wasn't clear on the application whether or not health is going to be in or out. So we basically put every single one of these 2.5 numbers in a spreadsheet, defined all of them, and filled out the entire application, which I chatted it. And then, so we're ready to go as soon as they define those numbers. And that's the only kind of solution I feel like is the right thing to do right now, because everything else is hypothetical in terms of what actual average monthly spend is. Just my 2 cents.
All right, thank you. I want to know, are you, Alexa or Jason, looking at all the questions in the chat? We've got like 36 questions there, and I'm wondering if you want to answer some of them that people have already asked.
You know what? Let me finish. I have like a little bit more about these PPP loans, and then I think we'll take a look at the questions in the chat, because I think the highlights, everybody really cares about these PPP loans, so we can start answering those questions. But just, I'm on slide 14.
Okay.
Called CARES Act effect on non-disaster SBA loans. You just want to let you know that the SBA is going to pay the principal and interest for the first 6 months. So there's nothing due from the borrower for the first 6 months. Okay. So the portions of the loans that are not forgiven are going to be paid out over a maximum of 10 years at a maximum rate of 4%. There's no prepayment penalties. There's no collateral required. And there's also no personal guarantees required. There are no borrower or lender fees on this. And then also, an important point is the cancel loan income. So when these loans are forgiven, it will not be income on your taxes. So it's going to be excluded from gross income. So that's all that I have on the PPP loans.
How about the determination of forgiveness after that 6-month period? How is that going to be determined, and how quickly can you attest to your payroll, keeping your payroll on, and the things that'll be the criteria to determine if this becomes a grant?
Right. So the period for that is the 8 weeks after the loan is originated. So you look at that 8 weeks, and that's going to be the period where you'll have the loan forgiven. So anything that happens after 8 weeks, if you don't get the entire loan forgiven, then that extra portion then becomes due 10 years after the 6 months.
I guess I'll rephrase my question. Is there any guidance that we know about what the process will be to determine if you're eligible for forgiveness?
What the criteria are?
Well, I understand what the criteria are. What's the process? Let's say I get $100,000 loan. I get $100,000 loan.
I don't think anyone knows that answer.
Okay, you don't know the answer.
So I think what's going to happen is you're going to have to, present all your information to your bank, and they're going to process it, and they're going to see, they'll probably have to certify to it to the SBA.
The separate application process. It's a separate application process. A couple of things I also want to kind of caution folks about as well. Again, just sort of given my experience as a restructuring lawyer. One, it's nice to have the forgiveness as part of the law. It's there, it's available. But then again, so was the student loan discharge. That was also something that was available, and we see how the government messed that up. I would have to think that there's a possibility, at least, that once the application will be put in, your banks will ask you for more information. They're going to ask you for information you already provided. You're not going to hear back from them for a while. But you get the documentation, get the information for the 8-week period after you receive the loan. Have it ready, have it available for the many times that you'll probably be asked for that information. And then you'll have to sort of wait to see what the determination is. If the determination is not favorable to you, you probably want to talk to me. Think about talking to your lawyer or your accountant about helping you educate your banker as to what you're entitled to get. The worst case scenario, though, is that's treated as a loan, 4% interest at maximum. You can repay over several years. It'll depend on your loan documentation. So I just don't want people to think that after 8 weeks we'll know how much is going to be forgiven and everybody's going to agree with this and the government's going to be fine with it. I just don't think that's going to happen. But again, follow what the rules say about how you can spend your money, have the information ready, and get your application in quickly. But this is a separate second application process. You'll have to apply for it for the forgiveness through that separate process.
Thank you.
And so far, the forgiveness is totally different criteria, right? So the forgiveness is rent and utilities, et cetera, whereas so far, the 2.5% on average monthly payroll has nothing to do with those things, utilities, rent, et cetera.
Correct. So the amount that you're able to get is determined 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, subject to the $10 million cap. That's issue one. How much money am I getting? Next, second question, what can I use the money for? Payroll, rent, as long as you had the tenancy but by February 15th. Mortgage interest, as long as you had the mortgage by February 15th of this year. Utilities, health insurance, that stuff. That's what you can use the money for. Third issue, what gets forgiven? That is the 8 weeks worth of payroll, again, subject to the $100,000 per employee cap, rent, utilities. The one thing you can use the money for, but it's not forgiven, is you can use the PPP loan to pay off or pay down existing debt. You can use it for that purpose. That's not going to be forgiven, though. It's basically like you're refinancing the loan if you have an existing loan through the PPP program. The other thing I think I want to make sure that everybody thinks about is to the extent that you have existing bank debt, any sort of debt documents, check those documents first to make sure that you are entitled, you can receive additional loans under your existing debt documents if you have existing bank debt. A lot of loan documents will say that there's a covenant against incurring further indebtedness. So you may need to get your current lender's consent to seek more indebtedness. Most bank debt documents say that you need to get that you cannot encumber any assets. Now, fortunately, with the PPP loans, those are not collateralized. The EIDL loans, the ones that Jason was talking about first, they may need to be collateralized because the collateral is going to be sought by the SBA, I think, for anything over $25,000. You don't want to get sideways with your existing bank if you're not in default already. by seeking additional loans. So I want to caution folks to make sure that they have a 360 view of what their obligations are under their bank debt, or even in other major contracts that there. Sometimes you have your weird covenants in your major contracts.
Also, I wanted to mention that these EIDL loans, the EIDL loans, the streamlined application just went online last Friday. So, I mean, it's also very new, but I would definitely advise you to apply for that, because you most likely will be getting $10,000 within 3 days of applying. That's a free $10,000. So everybody on this call should apply for an EIDL loan if they qualify for it. And also, I've been hearing different things than Mike. I've been hearing the banks are going to flow this money within 2 or 3 days of an application coming in, because the underwriting requirements aren't as stringent as what people were fearing they would be. So again, like what Mike said, get in the queue, get in line, and get in touch with your banker as quickly as possible, because you may be getting relief as quickly as in a week from now. So, I think that, if you do 2 things after this call is, one is apply for an EIDL, and second is talk to your banker as quickly as possible and get in line.
Quick question about the IDL there.
Just a note on the EIDL, sorry, my dog just walked in, EIDL loans. If you're applying for one and you haven't gotten any money yet from the SBA for these EIDLs, you will be precluded from getting a PPP loan. So it's one or the other at this point. If you've already got an SBA loan prior to the enactment of the CARE Act, then you're fine. You can have both, but you can't have both at this point.
I thought you could refinance the EIDL into the PPP loan as part of it.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you already have it, if you've already gotten your loan, but if you're applying, if you have an application in right now for an SBA EIDL loan and you haven't got it yet, but you're like absolutely dead set on wanting to get one of these PPP loans, consider your options, because the PPP loan might be better for you.
Right, but you can apply for both, just to make this clear. You can apply for both, and the EIDL loans historically have taken up to 90 days to get paid out, besides for the initial $10,000. So if in 90 days, you're offered the EIDL loan and you don't want it anymore, you can say, no, I don't want it. There's no penalties, no fees, there's nothing. But the maximum principal that you can apply for is whatever you apply for under the EIDL, plus whatever you qualify for under the PPP loans. So they're aggregated together.
Just a question about the EIDL application. There's that short one on the SBA website, but then the documents you showed are required is entirely different. Do you know where those would be submitted?
Which one?
The document that I showed you, just put up on the screen here. This is for, I think there's a link to it already. This is for the PPP loan.
No, earlier around the ID. I thought earlier around the IDL, you listed a bunch of documents that need to be submitted for that.
There is. That's
the website.
That has to be updated. That was part of the updated presentation. That's why we didn't go over it.
Oh, I see. So those don't need to be required. There's just that FAST application that's on the SBA website now.
There's a streamlined application that's now available that was put on online last Friday.
Okay.
So I was on that website
to.
last night, and I filled out the first page online. There was no way the continue button was grayed out, and I had to abandon it.
Okay. There's certain things, if you don't answer it right, it grayed out on me, and I had to go back and search, and I found things that then it didn't gray out. I went through it too.
Yeah,
the one question I had is you never put in a number. You never asked a number of how much you want. Besides the $10,000, it doesn't ask you for how much you're looking to borrow.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming when they respond, they'll ask me that question.
Yeah, hopefully they'll fix that and they'll follow up with folks. I mean, unfortunately, this might be like the Obamacare website from 10 years ago.
Right.
Probably. I have a quick question. If you're more profitable during the time period, will that loan be forgiven?
If you're more profitable, yes, it still will be forgiven. If you meet the requirements,
profits.
it will be forgiven.
I have a question. Could you clarify the can you apply for the SBA emergency relief $10,000 and not any working capital loans and then also apply for the PPP, just to get the 10,000 emergency relief?
Yes. That's what I think we're recommending to you.
Yeah, I think that is
That's my
possible.
recommendation. I don't know if Mike and Alexa agree with that.
No,
I
I
would
think that's-
recommend you apply for everything as
Agreed.
quickly as possible.
Thank you.
So I apologize. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. So reading a lot about this. Did you answer the question? Did you say that if we show a level of profitability or more profitability during this period, that the loan can still be forgiven, meaning that it's a grant, not a loan?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So
it's,
yes,
it's
the eligibility.
it's a reward for not panicking, right? You know, a lot of people, including myself, are like, you know, what's going to happen in April and May? Maybe I should proactively, even though thank God we're, fine right now. You know, maybe I should start laying people off to prepare for the next couple of months. So this is a reward for people to hang in there and not panic as well. That's at least how I take it.
I like how you put that. I think you're absolutely right.
It's a way to give money out to employees and businesses that are suffering, that will probably be suffering for the next 8 weeks. And also something to consider, which we haven't touched upon yet, you know, when you're figuring out whether to lay off or furlough employees, is that, you know, right now that unemployment insurance has been supercharged. So the maximum that you receive now in New York is $1,100 per week. So if you're considering, you know, furloughing somebody for a month until you get this loan, I just realized that your employees will be making some money. You know, typically unemployment is $500 a week, which is not a lot. It's probably not enough to live on in this area. But, right now it's $1,100. So something to consider when you're deciding who to furlough, how many employees to furlough or lay off.
Or I just furloughed myself because of that. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm not sure you can actually apply for unemployment if you're the owner of the business, but you should try. Listen, I think also we're telling clients, you know, there's other issues which I don't know if anybody has in this group, but for partnerships, you know, the question is for income partners that have guaranteed payments, are they employees or not? And, you know, that's been a question I don't think there's an answer to right now, at least. But we're telling, you know, our clients to assume that those partners are employees and get the most you can get from this loan. Because I think that there's going to be a lot of, bean counters looking at these applications. So they may overlook certain things. So I would be as aggressive within the bounds of the law and the contours of the law that you can.
So what I want to caution folks about there, I completely agree with Jason, but again, remember we're talking about two separate processes, two separate applications, probably two separate groups of people looking at this stuff. One is, how much am I going to get for my loans? You have 2.5 times every single thing you want to put in there, and you may get that granted to you, and that's great. You get the money in. Time comes to seek the forgiveness, though. They may say, "Well, wait a second. There, you paid some income partners some money. That's not part of it. You may kind of peel back on how much gets forgiven. That's a possibility. What does that mean? The outcome would be that would have to be paid back under the terms of your loan, 4% interest or perhaps less, and for up to 10 years. So, again, you want to think about how much do you really want to borrow, because I don't want folks to think or assume that every dollar I'm going to get or most of the dollars I'm going to get is ultimately going to be forgiven. Maybe that's true. But but you have to sort of think about, okay, this is really a loan. It's a loan unless proven otherwise, just sort of given the way that this is set up. And that's more practical than legal advice.
So if you find out that you borrowed more than you can actually have forgiven, you have 6 months to prepay it with no penalty. So you can pay back the government. So say you get the loan May 1st, by November 1st, you can repay the loan, and it's really at no cost to you. You can prepay, there's no penalties, and there's no principal and interest due for 6 months. So if you're a little more aggressive and you find out that, you couldn't spend the money and have it forgiven based on the metrics, a few months from now, when the dust settles, and there's more guidance about these parameters for the forgiveness, you can always return the money to the bank.
With the With the EIDL loans, is it one or the other? You either take advantage of the SBA loan or you do the EIDL program. You can't do both, correct?
You can do both.
You can do both. Okay.
Yes.
All right, Renee, you're trying to get a question in there. Go for it, Renee.
What about temp help? Because we've had temps here on and off in 2019. Do they count as a head count or
The
salary?
statute talks about full-time equivalent employees. So I think the better interpretation, again, it's not clear because the word temporary employees isn't in the statute, that you can convert whatever time they put in there to full-time employees, at least again for purposes of determining how much you get. You're talking about 2019. That's an issue of how much loan proceeds you're going to be able to get, because 2.5 times your average payroll, monthly payroll. I would say if you want to bring more money in, get a larger loan amount, I think there certainly is a defensible interpretation, at least of the statute, that you can convert temporaries into full-time equivalents and use that towards the 2.5 times. Now, I think there's going to be more regulations coming out in the next few days, so that may be different. I may be proven wrong there, but I think that's. Yeah.
But what about the head count? So how does that go for the head count?
Yeah, so that's the flip side to that. And again, different process, because again, for the head count, they're going to look at what you had in your test period 2019 versus 8 weeks, I believe, after you received the loan. So you may be in a situation where if you're more aggressive in how you count heads in 2019, you may be in a situation where you have more money coming in from a loan perspective, more liquidity, but you may be questioned later on when it comes time to ask for forgiveness. So again, that's why I always want people to sort of think about, okay, think of this coming in as a loan, and we be aggressive as we want to when we ask for forgiveness, but it's going to probably take a while, and I'm a little bit of a pessimist at heart, I guess, just given what I do. Hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully this will go swimmingly, but it's so many times when things have not gone swimmingly. So it was one of these things where you're concerned about taking on more debt, more leverage, then don't ask for the sun, the moon, the stars when you're putting in your average monthly payroll for determining the amount of the loan you're going to get. If that's too much, you can't bite off. Don't bite off more than you can chew, and then do the best we can when time comes for forgiveness. And you may not know about forgiveness until next year.
Michael,
Maybe.
question on the contractors, because that's pretty important. And a lot of my clients are asking about it.
Okay.
So I have two questions. Can you please define what the government classifies as a full-time worker? And then the second question is, I don't understand how they can do that. So if Renee uses contractors and they don't count in the census, right, according to the law, then as a staffing provider, how can my employees that are deployed as resources be counted in the census? Because that's a cake and eat it too thing for employers, because that means they can lay off all their contractors and then I'm stuck with the check. So can you define what a full-time worker is classified as under this? And then can you tell me what's the disposition? Because Renee has a really good question for how we handle contractors, because I deploy them and she's a consumer of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and unfortunately, there isn't that level of detail, at least in the statute of the CARES Act. The term employee really isn't really defined. It's based on other definitions in other laws, unfortunately. So I think for purposes of this, anybody who's going to try to figure out how much you're going to be able to receive by loans by head count, they're going to have the exact same types of issues. I think that if you have somebody in as a contractor, because payroll is defined pretty broadly. Again, we're talking about the term payroll, and that's salary, that's wages, and other similar consideration. So that could that be 1099 contractors? What you pay them? Probably. I mean, I'd probably say it probably is. Again, so that comes to the question of how much are you going to be able to get as your loan? This is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. That's really the definition there.
Can I ask a question about FTEs and what calculations? Is there a formula that they're approving, or is it the same as Obamacare, and is overtime calculated into calculating FTE equivalent?
I believe overtime is part of what is counted for purposes of payroll. Am I right, Jason?
Yeah,
Right? I think
that's
right.
correct.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
So
again,
the same,
yes.
similar to Obamacare.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It would make sense to stay consistent among those programs, although you got different people doing those different things at different times. But I think there is a real possibility.
Would bonuses be counted?
Yes.
So would bonuses be counted as part of payroll?
Yes.
Yep.
So can you guys address some of the questions in the chat? It's 11:45 right now, and I know some people are typing, and we promised we'd answer those.
Sure. So I took a couple of notes. There was a question about affiliated companies. Do you have to do two different loans for two different companies? There are affiliation rules with respect to the SBA. So first and foremost, if you have, say, 2, 3, multiple different companies under kind of the same ownership umbrella, what the SBA will do is they will aggregate those employees with a couple of exceptions. But generally, I'll talk about generally first. If you have company A that's got 300 employees, company B that's got 300 employees, are all under your own same ownership threshold, those will be put together. And unless you're in the hospitality, accommodation, food industry, you would be ineligible to receive a PPP. One of the things they ask for in the PPP application form, which I think there's a link already put online there, is they ask you whether there's any other businesses and who owns ownership stakes in the business. So if you have multiple different companies, 500 total, you may be in a situation where the banker is going to tell you that you're not entitled to an SBA loan. Different rules again for accommodations, for food, for franchises, certain types of franchises. But again, for application purposes, you put all your companies in as one application. Somebody's asking about, can I lay somebody off during the 8 weeks? As Jason mentioned, if you lay folks off during the 8 weeks after you receive the loan, that will count against you for purposes of forgiveness.
If you lay them off after you've completed the 8 weeks.
I believe it's during the 8 weeks, although I could be wrong about that. I want to double check that. Because basically the forgiveness is a snapshot. Yeah. If you lay somebody off more than 8 weeks after you get the loan, does that ding you for the forgiveness, or do they just look at the 8 weeks?
It does not.
How about prior to the 8 weeks?
Right. That was a question about laying somebody off on June 29th or hiring them.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, if you've already furloughed, you can rehire without penalty within that certain window. So if you rehire and then lay them off right after the loan period's over,
you could.
That's all theoretically still eligible.
Yes.
Hey, I thought that the rehiring was until June 30th, and you wrote in your PowerPoint April 26th. Is that a change?
I don't know where that is in the presentation.
No, so if you fire between now and say April 26th, but you rehire by June 30th, that will not be counted against you.
Is the 8 week period from May 1st to June 30th?
8 weeks after you get the loan proceeds.
Okay. So once you get the proceeds, it's 8 weeks on week 9 after the loan. If you need to lay someone off, you can.
Yeah, well, you can always let people off. I mean, that's why I also make sure that people understand as well. Like I get a question from a couple of clients who called me. Can I not lay people off? No, you can. You can also reduce salaries by more than 25% if you feel that you need to. That's going to count against you for purposes of forgiveness. So it's a business decision.
With that,
it's not a cliff. It's not a cliff, guys.
That's right.
At the end of the day, if you need a cash flow, do it, but you'll just get less forgiveness. But it's not like you're getting no forgiveness. There's a formula.
There's a formula, right? It peels you back from the forgiveness, and again, whatever is not forgiven, it's basically a loan. It's a 4% or less interest rate loan.
Is the 8 week period for the payback good only till June 30th? So you have to get the application in, and then once they approve it, you get the 8 weeks. But if the 8 weeks extends into July, then you only get like 7 weeks or 6 weeks?
No, I think it's, the 8 weeks for purposes of, what you're entitled to receive forgiveness for, regardless of when the loan gets funded. You got to put the application in on time. The loan's going to get funded whenever it's going to get funded. You have 8 weeks from the time the loan is funded when the money's in your bank account. Whatever you spend on, again, qualified payroll, rent, utilities, all that stuff during the 8 weeks at that point, you're not peeling off the number of weeks. It's always going to be 8 weeks from when you get the money for purposes of calculating what you get forgiven.
So if you lay people off after the 8 weeks, that's irrelevant to this PPP repayment.
Irrelevant. Irrelevant.
That's right.
So if they don't do anything, we're apt to see a huge amount of layoffs deferred for the next, until June 30th. And then if this thing is still going on, people will just lay people off then.
Right. Well, actually, it may not be June 30th. If the loans start flowing in a week or two, it'll be earlier than that.
Yeah. Or later than that, depending on when loans get funded. Right. Yeah.
Wait, is it 2 months after you receive the loan?
Yes.
Yes.
More questions in the chat?
I asked if there is any way for an LLC with a majority holder not being a US citizen or a permanent resident to qualify.
My understanding is no, you can't qualify.
Even if there is a minority owner that is a US citizen.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at the application form.
It says 20%. Yeah, the application says, are there any owners that are over 20% on the application? So if you could list them as an owner over 20%, then I would imagine.
But I think
I don't know the answer.
you can't count people who are not U.S. citizens. That's my understanding. I'll have to go back and look at the law, but I think that's the way it's written. Now, the regulations may change that, but I think that's the way it's written.
Yeah, because the application asks you whether, and this is for all the 20% holders, whether U.S. citizen, lawful permanent resident status, or not a citizen, neither of the above. And I think if you're a lawful permanent resident, my sense is that you could qualify. Now, separate and apart, I want to just to turn these around. You certainly talk a little bit more about this. When it just reminded me in my head, for purpose of employees, we're talking about for how much you can get for the loan to your employee count is people who are residents of the U.S. So you got employees overseas, they're not going to count for purposes of your payroll for the 2.5 times that we've been talking about.
Yeah, no, of course, but the firm is mentioning just before the question that if the question to the question the question 7
yeah
is
correct.
No, the application will not be eligible. And so my question was actually in yes or no when you have a minority owner that is a US citizen.
Sorry, I don't think anyone can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
When a minority owner is a US citizen has 20% and a majority owner has 80% on this app.
You're not coming through on audio.
That's a yes or no.
It sounds like it's switching microphones constantly.
Julian, I think we should talk to you after the program's over. So why don't you email one of us, and then we'll respond to you and give us and we can give you our best thinking on this.
Jason, do you think that we could have just maybe a private session with maybe you and Mike and Alexa answer these questions that I could record and send to people, or?
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe do it. Unfortunately, today's kind of booked for me, but maybe Friday or something. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
I have one quick question. Are they going to run? Are they going to run the PG on these loans? Run APG on these loans? Like, it's going to go against my credit. I'm literally in the middle of a mortgage right now.
Yeah. It might be. Well, I mean, it's. I guess it might be. I mean, the nice thing is that it's not personal. There's no personal guarantees that is required by you. So you're talking about your business. Maybe they're not going to look to your personal credit because there's no personal guarantee here. All this is guaranteed by the SBA. I'd love to say that makes it clear to me that they shouldn't be running that against your credit, but I can't tell you for sure one way or the other. They might. It may depend on the bank as well. You know, sometimes you have the frontline folks at the bank, and there's guys sort of do, okay, this is the way we always do loans here. We always, you know, run credit, regardless of what program this is, right?
Greg Schwartz, I'm at 31.
Guys,
If
I
you're
have a
typical
question about
SBA loan,
1099.
it would be yes.
Here's why I'm calling you.
Yeah, that's right, Jason.
Right. So
Because you
There's
usually
a
have to get
chat
personal guarantees.
question. There's a chat question, but I really need to know the answer.
Sure, go for
If
it.
we claim 1099s in our overall payroll expenses, is that potentially going to impact how we classify those people going forward?
it should not. I mean, that's an employment law question, and none of us are employment lawyers.
I would hope not, but if you get some more litigation.
Andrew, you have any thoughts on that?
Andrew's on the phone.
Andrew's on the
There
phone.
you
I
go.
see him.
Bring him in.
Hi, everybody.
He's a relief pitcher.
You know,
Is he actually still practicing law, though?
You can run, but you can't hide, Andrew. You can run, but you can't hide.
You know, in 5 minutes, I thought I was good. I thought I was almost to noon.
No, we see you, buddy. We see you.
So, Jill, to answer the question with a non-answer, I mean, the way I view this is this legislation on how to whether to count 1099s or not as employees. My initial reaction is that won't impact whether or not they're properly classified under any other employment law. I would be very surprised if it did. That being said, this is truly like the Wild West, and I have no idea what some other governmental body will use an application for this loan as evidence against you. But my own feeling at this point is that it shouldn't. But I unfortunately, and because I hate giving lawyer answers, I can't say for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he has some sort of private cause of action or something for misclassification. But if I'm the lawyer, the first thing I'm going to be asking for is discovery of everything where he said, hey, look, they may be an employee.
What doesn't
kind
make
of more of a
sense to
practical
me is that the 1099s that I can count toward payroll, those 1099s also have the opportunity to apply for a loan as well. So it's double booking people for money. That just doesn't make any sense. And I think it's a setup for people like me who have half W-2s and half 1099s to come after us when all this is over to say, we told you those were employees, now pay us all this money going backwards. That's what I
mean.
think,
It's
that's just
Jill, again, it's possible, and because at this point anything is possible. And so my view is, and I think either Jason or Mike said it earlier, there's a lot of moving parts here. And so ultimately what the focus should be is over the next 2-3 months, as being as predictive as we can in this crazy environment, how much money do I need? And if I need to include contractors and it helps me and I can get more money and I need it to save the organization, then do it. And you'll deal with this other crap later.
Okay.
That's the way I view it. If you don't need it, if it's not a save the organization necessity, then I'd be a little bit more conservative.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Would it make sense? Would it make sense to sort of, I'm going to say, over-predict or over-borrow, knowing that ultimately you will give some of it back? But I'd rather have it in my account than be short on everything else. So even if we're not quite complying 100%, maybe we are complying 80% and accept the fact that 20% of the money you just got, you have to give back.
Well,
it's not like if you get caught, they're going to put you in jail because you lied. Right. You're simply saying, I overestimated.
Yeah, so you're right. So you have to make good faith representations in connection with the loan. So we're staying within the good faith bounds, obviously. The banker you're dealing with is going to determine how much of a loan you're going to get based on your good faith representation. So I think you're right. I mean, subject to the 1099 discussion that we had just now, because I can see that being a minefield later. But yeah, putting that to the side for a second, it's basically two questions, and they're kind of independent to a large degree, even though they're in the same bill. A, how much money is going to be available to me? B, how much of that's going to be forgiven? And they may be very different answers at the end of the day. And your worst case scenario, you're absolutely right, Walter, that your worst case scenario is you get a bunch of money coming in as a loan, none of it gets forgiven. You have now a massive, or maybe not so massive, loan that you'll have to pay back to your banker through the SBA program. And
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, my feeling is borrow as much as you can, and you have 6 months to prepay the loan if you don't need it.
Right.
And it's at no cost. There's no interest due. There's no principal due.
Right, you give it
When
back.
does the 6 months start?
It's free money to have in your bank in case you need it.
When
And if
does
you
the
don't
6
need it, you return it, and it's no cost.
At what time does the 6 months start? At the inception of the loan or June 30?
Inception of the loan.
So it's 12 o'clock. I know there's a lot of questions that didn't get answered, but Jason, Michael, and Alexa said that they would answer them on the side. You have any final words that you want to say? I just want to say thank you, the three of you, and Tannenbaum, Helpern, for your generous time today and answering these questions for our Vistage members.
Very, very welcome. The only thing that I'd mention as well, we can get to the payroll tax credit or the payroll tax deferral issue. If you get a PPP loan, you get forgiven, you're not going to be entitled to get the payroll tax deferral or credit. Usually people would rather just get the loan money, but that is one other downside to getting a PPP that I should mention.
Well, again, thank you all very much for participating. I will be putting the recording of this up on my blog, which is marktaylor.nyc. And we'll get another recording with Jason, Alexa, and Michael answering the questions that you had in the group chat probably by Monday, I would say, if